It started with love, the kind that sneaks up on you after years of thinking your heart had closed its doors for good. I met Mark when my daughter Lily was already 12 and his daughter Sophie was 10. We were both single parents who'd survived messy divorces, both wary of new beginnings but tired of being alone. Our first date was coffee at a park so the kids could play nearby and we could pretend it wasn't a date at all. Within months, we were blending families. Awkward dinners, where Sophie eyed Lily suspiciously, and Lily asked why Sophie got the bigger bedroom, but also movie nights where they eventually laughed at the same jokes, sleepovers where secrets were whispered under blankets, holidays where we all pretended the past didn't exist. Mark and I married quietly at City Hall 2 years later, no big ceremony, just us and the kids in their best clothes, promising to build something new together. Sophie called me Sarah at first, then Mom, when she was tired or hurt, though she never fully let go of her biological mother, who'd left when she was 6 and only appeared sporadically with expensive gifts and empty promises. I never pushed. I loved Sophie like my own, helped with homework, drove her to dance practice, sat through her teenage moods and first heartbreaks. When she graduated high school, I cried harder than anyone. When she got engaged at 23 to a kind, steady man named Ethan, I was the first person she told. The joy felt complete, our family, once fractured, now whole enough to celebrate new beginnings. The wedding planning began immediately. Sophie had always dreamed of something elegant but intimate, garden ceremony, fairy lights, white roses, about 100 guests. Mark and I sat down with her and Ethan one Sunday afternoon and offered to pay for it. Not because we had unlimited money. Mark was a high school history teacher. I ran a small accounting firm. But because we wanted to give her the day she deserved, the kind of day neither of us had gotten in our first marriages. We want to do this for you, I told her, tears in my eyes. Let us. She hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe. Thank you. Both of you. I love you. We set a budget, generous but realistic. $35,000. We covered the venue, a beautiful restored barn on a vineyard, catering, flowers, photographer, dress. Sophie chose everything with care, consulting me on colors, asking my opinion on centerpieces, even letting me help pick the cake. Mark walked around beaming, proud of our girl. The months flew by in a blur of fabric swatches, seating charts, and late-night texts about whether ivory or cream was better for the tablecloths. I lost sleep over details, ensuring the florist used the exact shade of blush Peony Sophie loved, confirming the string quartet knew her favorite songs for the ceremony. I'd never planned a wedding before, but I planned this one like it was my own daughter's, because in every way that mattered she was. The dress fitting was magical. Sophie stepped out in ivory lace that made her look like something from a fairy tale, and when she twirled, Mark teared up and I had to look away so no one saw me cry too. We booked the photographer who'd done Lily's senior portraits, the same caterer who'd fed us at our small wedding reception. Every choice felt like a stitch binding our blended family tighter. Then came the rehearsal dinner 2 nights before the wedding. We hosted it at our house, backyard strung with lights, long tables set with candles and wildflowers, close family and wedding party laughing over wine and barbecue. Sophie glowed in a simple sundress, Ethan's arm around her waist. Midway through toasts, Mark stood to speak. He raised his glass, voice thick. To Sophie, the girl who came into my life at 10 and made me a better man every day since. And to Sarah, who loved her like her own from the very beginning, we couldn't be prouder. Everyone cheered. Sophie hugged us both, whispering, "I love you," into my shoulder. I thought that was it, the perfect prelude to the perfect day. But the next morning, while I was steaming her veil in the guest room, Sophie knocked softly on the door. She looked pale, eyes red like she'd been crying. "Can we talk?" My stomach dropped. We sat on the edge of the bed, veil forgotten. She took a deep breath. I'd been thinking a lot. About the aisle. About who walks me down it. I nodded slowly, already knowing. "You want your dad," she winced. "He's been calling. He wants to be there. He says he's sober now, that he's changed. And I want him to walk me down the aisle. Just him." The room tilted. I'd spent months planning, paying, loving, and in one sentence, she chose the man who'd abandoned her for drugs and bad choices over the father who'd raised her and the woman who'd loved her through it all. "What about Mark?" I asked quietly. "He's been your dad since you were 10. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I know, and I love him. But this is something I need to do. For me. For closure. I'm sorry." I stared at the veil in my lap. Delicate lace I'd steamed myself, paid for myself, dreamed of seeing her wear. "And me? Where do I fit?" She reached for my hand. "You're still Mom. You're still everything. This isn't about replacing anyone, but it felt like replacement. Like erasure." I nodded once, throat too tight for words. "Okay, it's your day." She hugged me, sobbing apologies into my shoulder. I held her, stroked her hair, told her it would be okay, even as something inside me cracked wide open. When she left to tell Mark, I sat alone in the guest room holding the veil, tears falling onto the lace. The wedding was tomorrow. I'd paid for every detail. I'd loved her like my own. And tomorrow she would walk down the aisle I'd helped create, on the arm of a man who'd barely been present for most of her life. The pain wasn't just betrayal. It was the quiet realization that love doesn't always come back equal. Sometimes you give everything, and the person you gave it to chooses someone else to stand beside them when it matters most. I dried my eyes, hung the veil carefully, and went downstairs to face the day ahead. The wedding would happen. The photos would show a beautiful bride. But the smile I wore in those photos would cost me more than the entire event budget combined. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of the story, just the beginning of learning how to live with a heart that had given its all and still come up short. The morning of the wedding dawned soft and golden, sunlight filtering through the gauzy curtains in the bridal suite at the vineyard barn, turning everything hazy and dreamlike, the kind of light photographers pray for. Sophie sat in front of the antique mirror while the stylist pinned tiny white roses into her updo, the veil I paid for cascading down her back in perfect ivory waves. She looked radiant, peaceful, every inch the bride she'd always imagined. I stood behind her, adjusting the delicate lace at her shoulders, forcing my hands steady even as my chest ached with every breath. Mark had spent the night at his brother's to give us space, tradition, Sophie had said, and now he was downstairs in one of the guest cottages getting ready, probably tying his tie with the same careful focus he'd used when teaching Sophie to ride a bike or helping her study for college exams. He hadn't said much when Sophie told him her decision the day before. Just nodded once, kissed the top of her head, and said, "Whatever makes you happy, kiddo." But I'd seen the flicker in his eyes. The quiet hurt of a man who'd spent 13 years being dad in every way that counted, only to be set aside for the man who'd been absent for most of them. I'd held him that night after Sophie went to bed, felt his shoulders shake silently in the dark. "I thought we were past this," he whispered. I thought she knew. I had no answers then. I still didn't. Now, in the bridal suite, Sophie caught my eye in the mirror. "You okay?" she asked softly. I forced a smile, the same one I'd practiced in the bathroom mirror at 3 a.m., of course. "You look beautiful." She reached back, squeezed my hand. "Thank you for everything. The dress, the flowers, the barn. I know how much this cost. I know what it means." Her voice cracked on the last word. I swallowed hard. "It's your day. That's what matters. A knock at the door." Lily, my daughter, now 20 and home from college for the weekend, poked her head in. "Dad's ready. He's waiting downstairs." Sophie's eyes widened slightly. "Dad?" Lily hesitated, glanced at me. "Mark. He wants to see you before the ceremony." Sophie exhaled. "Right. Mark." She stood, smoothed her dress, and followed Lily out. I stayed behind a moment, alone with the empty room and the scent of roses. The veil hung on its stand like a ghost of what I'd imagined, me adjusting it one last time, whispering how proud I was, walking her partway down the aisle if she'd wanted both fathers. But she'd chosen. And choices once made carved their own paths. Downstairs, the barn had transformed, rows of white chairs tied with blush ribbon, an arch dripping with flowers, string quartet warming up in the corner. Guests milled about, friends, family, a few of Sophie's college roommates. Everyone smiling, unaware of the undercurrent. Mark stood near the entrance in his charcoal suit, looking handsome and composed. But I knew him well enough to see the tightness around his eyes, the way he kept straightening his tie like it might hold him together. When Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs, he froze, then smiled. The real one, the one that crinkled his eyes and made him look 10 years younger. She walked down slowly, careful of the train, and stopped in front of him. "Hi, Dad." The word hung between them, simple, loaded. Mark swallowed visibly. "You look like a dream." She hugged him carefully, mindful of the dress. "Thank you for everything, for being here." He held her a moment longer than necessary, wouldn't miss it. Then she stepped back, looked between us. "I love you both." "So much," I nodded, throat too tight to speak. Mark offered his arm. "Ready to see where you'll stand?" She took it, and they walked outside together. Father and daughter, the way it should have been. I followed at a distance, watching them move through the garden path lined with lanterns and roses. Guests turned, murmured how beautiful she looked. Cameras clicked. And I smiled. Bright, practiced, the smile I'd worn through every milestone where I'd been the steady one, the reliable one, the one who showed up. When they reached the aisle, Sophie paused, turned to Mark. "Wait here, okay? I'll come back for you after." He nodded once, released her arm. She walked the last few steps alone to the altar, where Ethan waited, eyes shining. The music swelled. Guests stood. And then the doors at the back opened again. Sophie's biological father, tall, graying, sober for the first time in years, stepped through in a rented tuxedo that didn't quite fit. He looked nervous, hopeful, like a man stepping into a role he'd abandoned long ago. Sophie's face lit up. She walked back down the aisle, alone this time, and took his arm. The quartet began canon in D. Everyone turned to watch the bride and her father process forward. Mark stood off to the side, hands clasped behind his back, face carefully neutral. I moved beside him, slipped my hand into his. He squeezed once, hard, then let go. The ceremony was beautiful. Vows spoken with trembling voices, rings exchanged, a kiss that drew cheers. Sophie looked radiant. Ethan looked like he'd won the lottery. When the officiant asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" her father answered clearly, "Her mother and I do." No mention of Mark. No acknowledgement of the man who'd raised her through every hard year. The reception followed. Dancing under string lights, toasts that praised Sophie's beauty and Ethan's character, cake cutting, bouquet toss. I smiled through it all. Danced with Lily. Posed for photos. Laughed at the right moments. Mark did the same. Shook hands, hugged guests, even danced with Sophie during the father-daughter dance while her biological father watched from the sidelines. When Sophie came to hug me afterward, she whispered, "Thank you for understanding." I hugged her back. "I love you. Always." And I meant it. The pain didn't erase the love. It just lived alongside it, now wise, sharp, quiet, permanent. As the last guests left and the lights dimmed, Mark and I stood in the empty barn, tables still scattered with confetti and empty glasses. He looked at the arch where vows had been spoken, at the dance floor where Sophie had spun in another man's arms. "I thought she'd choose us," he said quietly. "Both of us." I leaned against him. "She chose her story, the one that felt unfinished. It hurts, but it's her wedding. Her choice." He nodded slowly. "Doesn't make it sting less." No, we stood in silence a while longer. Then he took my hand. "We still have our family. You, me, Lily, Sophie. Even if she needs time to remember who raised her, and we have each other." I rested my head on his shoulder. "We do?" We turned off the last lights, locked the barn, drove home in the quiet dark. The check I'd written for the wedding had cleared days earlier. The photos would arrive in weeks, beautiful images of a perfect day. In every one, Sophie would be smiling, radiant, walking down an aisle I'd helped pay for, on the arm of the father she'd chosen. And somewhere in the background, blurred but present, would be Mark and I smiling too, because love doesn't stop when it's not chosen first. It just learns to stand on the sidelines sometimes, loving anyway. The pain settled that night like a stone in my chest. Heavy, but no longer sharp enough to cut. I'd paid for the wedding. I'd loved her through every stage. And if the aisle she chose wasn't the one I'd stood beside, that was her right. My right was to keep loving her quietly, steadily, without condition. Because family isn't always the one who walks you down the aisle. Sometimes it's the one who waits at the end, arms open, ready to catch you when the day is over and real life begins again. And we would be there, always. The reception photos arrived 3 weeks after the wedding, thick envelope from the photographer, glossy prints, and a USB drive tucked inside. I waited until the house was quiet, kids at school and Mark at work, before opening it on the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold beside me. The first image was Sophie and Ethan under the floral arch at golden hour, her veil catching the light like a halo, his smile wide and certain. Beautiful. Heartbreaking. I flipped through slowly. Sophie laughing with bridesmaids, Ethan's hand on her back during vows, the cake cutting where frosting smeared her nose and she giggled like she was 10 again. Then the father-daughter dance, Sophie swaying in her biological father's arms, eyes shining up at him, his hand careful on her waist like he was afraid she might vanish again. Mark wasn't in that shot. He appeared later, dancing with Lily, then with me, our smiles practiced and bright, the kind that hold everything together when the heart wants to crack open. In the group family photo, Sophie stood between Ethan and her father, Mark and I on the edges, arms around each other but slightly apart from the center. The composition was perfect. The message was clear. I closed the album, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in the bottom drawer of the dining room buffet, where we kept old report cards and holiday cards we couldn't bear to throw away. Mark came home that evening to find me folding laundry in the living room, the envelope still on the table. He saw it immediately. Photos? I nodded. He sat beside me, reached for my hand. You don't have to look if it hurts. I already did. Silence stretched between us. Then he asked the question we both avoided since the wedding. Do you regret paying for it? I thought about the barn, the roses, the string quartet playing her favorite song as she walked down the aisle on another man's arm. The $35,000 we'd saved for years, gone in one perfect day that wasn't quite ours. No, I said finally. Not for her. I'd do it again. She deserved beautiful memories. I just wish. My voice cracked. I wish she'd wanted me there too. In the picture, that matters. Mark pulled me close. She knows who raised her. She knows who stayed. One day she'll see it clearly. But days turned to weeks, weeks to months, and Sophie didn't bring it up. She called every Sunday like always, updates on the honeymoon, new apartment details, Ethan's promotion at work. She sent photos of their first Christmas tree, their dog wearing a Santa hat. She thanked us again for the wedding, said it was perfect. Never mentioned the aisle. Never asked how Mark felt. Never acknowledged the quiet hurt that still lived in our house like a guest who wouldn't leave. Lily noticed. She'd come home from college on breaks and watch us carefully. How Mark's smile dimmed when Sophie FaceTimed. How I changed the subject when wedding photos came up. One evening she found me in the kitchen staring at the fridge door where Sophie's save the date magnet still hung. Mom, she said quietly. You're allowed to be mad. I turned, surprised. I'm not mad. I'm sad. She leaned against the counter. You paid for everything. You planned everything. You loved her like she was yours. And she chose him. The words hung there. Simple, true, painful. I sighed. She needed closure. Her father wasn't there for most of her life. Walking her down the aisle was something she couldn't get back. Lily's eyes flashed. But Mark was. Every single day. And you were. You still are. She didn't even ask if it hurt him. Or you. I reached for her hand. It did. It does. But love doesn't keep score. Maybe it should, she muttered. Just once. Lily's anger mirrored my own, buried one. Sharper. Less tempered by years of choosing grace over resentment. She started texting Sophie more pointedly. Dad misses you. When are you visiting? Sophie's replies were warm but vague. Busy with work. Ethan's family holidays. Maybe next summer. Visits dwindled. Phone calls grew shorter. The weekly check-ins became bi-weekly, then monthly. Birthdays still got cards and calls, holidays brought photos, but the closeness we'd built over years felt stretched thin, fraying at the edges. Mark never complained. He still sent Sophie funny memes, still asked about her job, still said, love you, at the end of every call. But I saw the change in him, the way he hesitated before answering her texts, the way he looked at old photos of her as a teenager and sighed instead of smiling. One evening, 6 months after the wedding, he came home from work early, found me in the garden pulling weeds. He sat on the bench beside the roses Sophie had chosen for her bouquet. I think I'm done waiting, he said quietly. I looked up, dirt on my gloves. For what? For her to remember who was there. He stared at the spot where the wedding tent had stood, now just grass again. I raised her. I taught her to drive. I helped her with college applications. I walked her to kindergarten, bandaged her knees, cheered at every recital. And when it mattered most, she chose him. His voice cracked on the last word. I stood, brushed dirt from my knees, sat beside him. She chose her story. Not you, not me. Her. He nodded slowly. I know, but it still feels like she chose against us. We sat in silence as the sun dropped lower, painting the garden gold. Then he took my hand. I don't regret loving her. I don't regret any of it. But I'm done pretending it doesn't hurt. You don't have to pretend, I said. Not with me. That night, we talked. Really talked. about the ache we'd both carried since the wedding, about the love that hadn't been returned equally, about how to keep our hearts open without leaving them vulnerable to more pain. We decided on boundaries, not punishment, just protection. We'd still answer calls, still send birthday cards, still love her, but we wouldn't chase. We wouldn't beg for visits. We wouldn't keep score, but we also wouldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. The next time Sophie called, Mark answered. They talked about work, weather, Ethan's new project. Then he said gently, "We miss you, but we're giving you space. When you're ready to come home, the door's open. No pressure. Just love." She was quiet for a long moment. "I love you too, Dad." The word still carried weight, but it landed softer now, honest but distant. When she hung up, Mark looked at me across the kitchen. "That's enough for now." And it was. We turned our energy back to what was here, in Lily's college graduation coming up, Liam's soccer games, quiet dinners where we laughed without forcing it, weekends gardening or hiking, or simply sitting on the porch watching the sunset. The wedding photos stayed in the drawer. The veil I'd steamed so carefully went into storage. The barn, the roses, the aisle. They belonged to a day that had passed. What remained was us, Mark and I, our children, our life together. Not perfect. Not untouched by hurt. But real. Steady. Ours. And in the quiet spaces where Sophie's absence still echoed, we learned something new. Love doesn't always get the recognition it deserves. Sometimes it stands on the sidelines, loving anyway, silent, strong, waiting for the day it might be seen clearly. Until then, we kept living. Kept loving, kept choosing each other, and that choice, day after day, year after year, was the only aisle that truly mattered. The first few months after the wedding passed in a strange, suspended quiet. Phone calls that felt shorter each time, texts that took longer to answer, visits that never quite materialized. Sophie and Ethan moved into their new apartment downtown, a place with tall windows and exposed brick that looked beautiful in the photos she sent. "You'll have to come see it soon," she wrote. "We'll have you over for dinner." We replied with enthusiasm. "We'd love that," but the invitation never followed. Mark stopped asking when she might visit. I stopped setting an extra place at the table on Sundays just in case. We filled the space with other things. Lily's college graduation in May, where we cheered until our throats were raw. Long summer evenings on the porch with iced tea and fireflies. Small weekend trips to the lake where Mark taught Liam to skip stones, and I watched our son's face light up with every successful bounce. Life moved forward. But the absence lingered like a bruise that never quite faded. Sophie's thank you note arrived 6 weeks after the wedding, elegant cardstock, her handwriting careful and pretty. "Mom and Dad, thank you for the most beautiful day of my life. The barn, the flowers, the music. Everything was perfect. We're so grateful. Love, Sophie and Ethan." I read it twice, then placed it in the same drawer as the wedding photos. Mark read it once and handed it back without comment. We didn't frame it. We didn't read it aloud to each other. It simply joined the quiet archive of things we loved, but couldn't quite celebrate anymore. The first real fracture came at Thanksgiving. Sophie texted 2 weeks before, "We're doing a Friendsgiving thing with Ethan's family. Can we come for dessert after?" Mark read the message aloud in the kitchen, voice flat. "Dessert." I looked at him across the island. "We can say no." He shook his head. "We won't, but I'm not pretending everything's fine." When they arrived that evening, late after their own dinner, Sophie hugged us both tightly, eyes bright. Ethan shook Mark's hand, kissed my cheek. They brought wine and a store-bought pie. We served coffee and leftover pumpkin cheesecake on the good plates. Conversation stayed light. Work, the apartment, holiday plans. No one mentioned the wedding. No one mentioned the aisle. When Sophie stood to leave, she paused at the door. "Thanks for dessert. And thanks again. For everything." Mark looked at her for a long moment. "You're welcome, Soph." She hesitated, like she might say more, then hugged us both quickly and left. The door closed. Mark stared at it for several seconds. Then he turned off the porch light without a word and walked upstairs. I found him later sitting on the edge of the bed, elbows on knees, face in his hands. I sat beside him. "You don't have to keep saying you're welcome," I said softly. He laughed once. "Hollow. I know. I keep hoping she'll hear it. Really hear it. She might. Someday. Someday," he echoed. "I'm tired of someday." After that, the distance grew more deliberate. Sophie still called, still texted photos of new furniture or weekend hikes, still said "I love you" at the end of every conversation. But Mark's replies became shorter. He stopped sending the funny memes he used to forward her. He stopped asking detailed questions about her life. When she invited us to their first Christmas in the new apartment, he said gently, "We'll be with Lily and the grandkids this year. Maybe next time." Sophie's voice on the phone sounded small. "Okay, I understand." But she didn't push. She didn't ask why. Christmas came and went, our house full of Lily, her fiancé, and the baby they were expecting in spring. Laughter, wrapping paper, the smell of cinnamon and pine. Mark wore the ugly sweater Sophie had given him years ago. He smiled in the family photos. But when Sophie's Christmas card arrived, a professional shot of her and Ethan in front of their tree, no mention of us. He opened it, read the printed Merry Christmas message inside, and placed it on the mantel without comment. It stood beside the one from Lily, slightly crooked, slightly apart. The following spring, when Lily had her baby, a tiny girl named Grace, Sophie came to the hospital. She brought flowers, a stuffed giraffe, tears in her eyes when she held her niece for the first time. "She's perfect," she whispered. Mark watched from the doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. When Sophie hugged him goodbye, he hugged her back. Briefly, carefully. "Take care of yourself," he said. She nodded. "You too, Dad." She didn't stay long. She didn't ask to come over afterward. She left with promises to visit soon. She didn't. Summer arrived again. The garden bloomed the way it always did. Roses climbing the trellis, tomatoes ripening on the vine. Mark spent more time out there now, hands in the dirt, silence settling around him like a second skin. I joined him sometimes, pulling weeds beside him, neither of us needing to speak. One evening as the sun dropped low and golden across the yard, he set down his trowel and looked at me. I'm not angry anymore, he said. Not really. I'm just finished waiting for her to choose us. I nodded. I know. I still love her, he added quickly, like he needed to say it out loud. I always will. But I'm done measuring my worth by whether she remembers who raised her. I reached for his hand, dirt under both our nails. You don't have to measure anything. You know who you are to her, even if she forgets sometimes. He squeezed my fingers. And you. I thought about the veil, the barn, the check that had cleared without fanfare. The years of showing up, paying for recitals and braces and college textbooks. The quiet mornings I made her breakfast when her mother didn't call. The nights I'd sat outside her door when she cried over boys or grades or the emptiness her mother left behind. I'm finished waiting too, I said. After that, we adjusted. We stopped setting extra places on holidays. We stopped buying gifts she never acknowledged. We answered when she called, loved her when she reached out, but we no longer reached first. We didn't cut her off. We simply stopped chasing, and in the space that opened, something new grew. Mark started woodworking in the garage. Small things at first, a birdhouse for the garden, then a bookshelf for Lily's baby, then a rocking chair for the porch where we sat most evenings watching the stars. I planted more roses, blush ones, the same shade as Sophie's wedding bouquet, not as punishment, as remembrance, as proof that beauty could grow even where something had been taken away. When Sophie called on Mother's Day, she sounded surprised when I answered on the second ring. I thought maybe you'd be busy. Never too busy for you, I said. We talked about Grace's first steps, Ethan's new job, the weather. She hesitated at the end. I miss you guys. I paused. We miss you too. Silence. Then, softly, I know I hurt you. Both of you. I didn't mean to. I just needed something I thought I'd never get. I know, I said. And we gave you everything else we had. Another pause. I'm sorry. The words landed simple and true. I didn't rush to fill the quiet. Thank you, I said finally. We're still here when you're ready, she whispered. I love you. We love you too. When the call ended, Mark looked at me from across the kitchen. Progress? Maybe, I said. Or maybe just honesty. Either way, it was enough for now. The garden kept blooming. The rocking chair Mark built got its first coat of paint. Lily brought Grace over for weekends, filling the house with baby laughter and new memories. And somewhere in the distance, Sophie lived her life. Beautiful, complicated hers. We no longer waited for her to choose us. We chose ourselves. We chose each other. We chose the family we built, the love we'd earned, the peace we'd fought for. And in that choice, quiet, steady, unshakable, the hurt didn't disappear. It simply stopped being the loudest thing in the room. The second year after the wedding settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal if you didn't look too closely, phone calls on birthdays and holidays, occasional photos of Sophie and Ethan's new life, short visits when schedules aligned. But the visits were always brief, coffee on the porch instead of dinner inside, quick hugs at the door instead of lingering in the living room, conversations that stayed surface level, work updates, weather, Ethan's latest promotion. Never the deep talks we used to have, never the quiet moments where Sophie would curl up on the couch and tell us everything. Mark greeted her warmly each time, asked the right questions, laughed at the right moments. But the light in his eyes when she walked through the door had dimmed. He no longer kept her favorite snacks stocked in the pantry. He no longer texted her random dad jokes during the week. He loved her still deeply, fiercely. But he'd learned to love from a distance, the way you love someone who's chosen to live on the other side of a river you can't cross. I mirrored him. Not out of spite, but self-preservation. I stopped sending care packages with homemade cookies and handwritten notes. I stopped asking when she might come for a weekend. I answered when she called, listened when she talked, told her I loved her. But I no longer waited for her to say it back in the way I needed to hear. The ache didn't disappear. It simply became part of the furniture, something we walked around carefully, something we accepted as permanent. Lily noticed most. She'd come home from her new job in the city, bring Grace for weekends, and watch us with the same sharp eyes she'd had since childhood. One Saturday afternoon while we were all in the backyard, Grace toddling after Bubbles, Liam chasing her with a toy truck, Lily pulled me aside near the rose trellis. You and Dad are different with Sophie now. I nodded, watching Mark push Grace gently on the baby swing. We are. You're not angry? Not angry, I said. Just. Done chasing. Lily looked toward her sister's empty chair on the porch. She knows she hurt you both. She just doesn't know what to do about it. That's her journey, I said quietly. Not ours. Lily hugged me suddenly. Fierce, protective. I'm glad you're protecting yourselves. You deserve that. The words landed soft but solid. I hugged her back, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. We do. That summer Sophie announced she was pregnant. The news came via FaceTime. Her face glowing, Ethan's arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling like they'd won something precious. We're having a baby, she said, voice trembling with joy. Mark and I sat on the couch, faces lit by the screen. We congratulated them, genuine happiness breaking through the careful distance we'd built. That's wonderful, I said. I'm so happy for you. Mark's voice was thick. You'll be an amazing mom. Sophie's eyes filled. Thank you. Both of you. I want you in this baby's life, really in it. The words hung there, hopeful, tentative. We nodded. We'd love that, Mark said. Whenever you're ready. She cried then, soft, grateful tears. I'm ready. I want my baby to know their grandparents. The ones who've always been there. The call ended with promises of visits, of nursery plans, of baby showers. For the first time in 2 years, something cracked open, Not wide, not all the way, but enough to let light in. The baby, a girl they named Harper, arrived in early spring. Sophie texted us photos from the hospital. Tiny hands, dark hair, eyes still swollen shut. Mark stared at the screen for a long time. She looks like Sophie did, I nodded, throat tight. She does. They invited us to the hospital the next day. We went, flowers in hand, hearts carefully guarded. Sophie looked exhausted and radiant, Ethan proud beside her. When she placed Harper in Mark's arms, he held her like she was made of glass, tears slipping down his cheeks unchecked. "Hi, little one," he whispered. "I'm your grandpa." Sophie watched him, eyes shining. Then she looked at me. "Mom, do you want to hold her?" The word, "Mom," landed like a gift I hadn't expected. I took Harper gently, felt her small weight settle against my chest, smelled the sweet newborn scent that never changes no matter whose child it is. Sophie reached over, touched my arm. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for still being here." I looked at her, really looked, and saw the girl I'd raised, the young woman who'd chosen her own path, and now the mother who finally understood what it meant to give everything and hope it came back. "Always?" I said. Mark took photos, Harper in my arms, then his, then both of us together. Sophie watched, tears slipping silently. When it was time to leave, she hugged us both, long, tight hugs that carried apologies words couldn't quite capture. "Come back soon," she said. "Please." We promised we would, and we did. The visits started small, once a month, then more often. Harper grew. First smiles, first words, first steps. Sophie called more. Mark answered without hesitation. I sent care packages again. Baby clothes, homemade baby food, little notes for Sophie tucked inside. We didn't erase the hurt. We didn't pretend the aisle choice hadn't left scars. But we chose to build on what remained love that had survived distance, regret, time. Harper's first birthday arrived a year later. Backyard party at their place, balloons and cake and family. Sophie asked Mark to give the toast. He stood, glass raised, voice steady, to Harper. And to Sophie for choosing love even when it's hard. And to Sarah for teaching me that love doesn't keep score. It just keeps showing up. Everyone raised their glasses. Sophie looked at me across the yard, eyes shining. I raised mine back. No words needed. Later, when the guests had left and Harper was asleep, Sophie found me in the kitchen washing dishes. She leaned against the counter. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for choosing him that day. For not seeing what I had right in front of me." I dried my hands, turned to face her. "I know. I was scared," she continued. "Scared if I chose you both, it meant erasing him. Scared if I chose, I'd lose you. I didn't know how to do both." "You could have asked," I said gently. "We would have helped you figure it out." She nodded, tears slipping. "I know that now." I pulled her into a hug. The same way I had when she was small, when she scraped her knee or had her heart broken. She cried into my shoulder. "I love you," she whispered. I never stopped. "I know," I said again. "And I love you too." We stood there a long time, mother and daughter, not by blood, but by choice. The kind of choice that survives hurt, distance, time. When we finally pulled apart, Mark was in the doorway, Harper asleep on his shoulder. He looked at us both, eyes soft. "Everything okay?" Sophie smiled through tears. "Yeah, everything's okay." And for the first time in years, it really felt like it might be. The scars remained, quiet reminders of choices made, words unspoken, love tested, but they no longer defined the story. What defined it now was this: a family that had bent but not broken, that had learned to love with open eyes and guarded hearts, that had chosen each other again, not because it was easy, but because it was worth it. Harper stirred in Mark's arms, murmured something sleepy. Sophie reached for her daughter. I watched them, my husband, my stepdaughter, my granddaughter, and felt the last piece settle into place. The aisle had been walked, the choice had been made. And in the years that followed, we kept choosing day after day, moment after moment, to show up, to forgive, to love anyway. Not perfectly, not without pain, but fully. And that fullness, messy, real, earned, was more beautiful than any wedding day could ever be. The years after Harper's birth unfolded in careful, deliberate steps, small bridges rebuilt over the chasm Sophie's wedding choice had carved. Visits became more frequent, but still measured. Sunday afternoons at our house, where Harper toddled across the living room chasing Buddy's tail, Sophie watching from the couch with a soft, watchful smile. She never stayed long enough for dinner, always citing Ethan's schedule or Harper's nap time, but she came. She brought photos of milestones, first tooth, first words, first steps, and shared them without prompting. Mark took them gently, asked the right questions, laughed at Harper's babble. He never pushed for more. He never mentioned the aisle. He simply showed up, steady, present, loving from whatever distance Sophie allowed. I mirrored him. I baked cookies for Harper's visits, read her books on the porch swing, let her fall asleep in my lap while Sophie and Ethan talked quietly in the kitchen. I didn't ask why she still called her biological father Dad in photos she posted online. I didn't ask when she might spend a full weekend. I simply loved her daughter the way I'd loved her, without condition, without scorekeeping. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Sophie began to close the gap herself. One rainy Saturday, when Harper was 3, Sophie arrived unannounced with a bag of groceries and a determined look. "I want to cook dinner," she said. "All of us. Together." Mark paused in the hallway, keys still in hand from running errands. I looked at him. He looked at me. Then he smiled. The real one, the one that reached his eyes. "I'll set the table." We cooked side by side like we used to. Sophie chopping vegetables, me stirring sauce, Mark opening wine. Harper helped by scattering Cheerios across the floor. Conversation flowed easier than it had in years. Stories about work, about Lily's new job, about Ethan's latest project. No one mentioned the wedding. No one needed to. After dinner, while Harper napped on the couch, Sophie lingered in the kitchen helping with dishes. Mark dried while she washed. I watched from the doorway. I've been thinking, Sophie said quietly, not looking up from the sink. About the wedding. About choosing him. Mark's hand still on the towel. Yeah? She nodded. I was scared. Scared that if I chose you, both of you, it meant I was erasing him completely, like I was saying he never mattered. But I know now that wasn't fair. To either of you? Mark set the towel down carefully. We didn't want to erase him. We just wanted to be seen. Sophie's voice cracked. I see you now. I see everything you did. Everything you still do. I'm sorry it took me so long. Mark looked at her, really looked, and his eyes filled. I never stopped loving you, Soph. Not for a second. She turned off the faucet, dried her hands, and stepped into his arms. He held her the way he always had, strong, steady, forgiving. I joined them, wrapping my arms around both. We stood there in the kitchen, 3 people who'd survived a fracture, holding on to what remained. When Harper woke and toddled in, sleepy and confused, Sophie lifted her up. Look, baby, this is your family. Harper reached for Mark. Pop, pop. He took her, kissed her forehead. That's right, sweetheart. The moment passed. Ordinary, profound, perfect in its imperfection. After that, things shifted again. Not dramatically, not with grand gestures, but steadily. Sophie started calling more often. She invited us for holidays, first just dessert, then full dinners. She asked Mark to help teach Harper how to ride a tricycle. She asked me to help plan Harper's first birthday party. We said yes, not because we'd forgotten, but because we'd chosen to remember the love that had come before the hurt. Lily watched it all with quiet approval. You didn't have to forgive her, she said one evening while we rocked Harper to sleep. But I'm glad you did. We didn't forgive the choice, I said softly. We forgave the fear behind it, and we chose to keep loving anyway. Lily nodded. That's harder, and better. Harper turned 4 that summer. We hosted the party at our house. Backyard filled with balloons, a bounce house, a small cake shaped like a unicorn, because Harper insisted unicorns were real and deserved cake. Sophie arrived early to help set up. She hugged me tightly at the door. Thank you for this. It's what families do, I said. Mark carried Harper around on his shoulders, making her squeal with delight. When it was time for cake, Sophie asked Mark to light the candles. He did, carefully, while everyone sang. Harper blew them out with one big breath. Sophie leaned over and whispered something in her ear. Harper giggled, then looked straight at Mark. Pop, pop, you're the best grandpa ever. Mark's eyes filled. He kissed her cheek. And you're the best granddaughter. Later, after the last guest left and Harper was napping inside, Sophie found me in the garden watering roses. She stood beside me, watching the water sparkle in the late afternoon sun. I used to think choosing him meant I had to choose against you, she said quietly. I was wrong. I set the watering can down. You were figuring it out. We all were. She took my hand. I'm still figuring it out, but I want you in my life. In Harper's life. In all of it. I squeezed her fingers. We're already here. That evening, as the sun set and fireflies began to rise, Mark and I sat on the porch swing with Sophie between us, Harper asleep in her lap, the house quiet except for crickets and distant laughter from the neighbor's yard. No one spoke for a long time. We didn't need to. The hurt hadn't vanished. It lived in small, quiet places, the wedding photos still in the drawer, the aisle memory that still stung on anniversaries. But it no longer defined us. What defined us now was this showing up, day after day, even when it was hard. Loving without scorekeeping. Choosing each other again, not because the pain had disappeared, but because the love had proven stronger. Sophie rested her head on Mark's shoulder. He kissed the top of her head, the same way he had when she was small. I reached across and took her hand. Harper stirred, murmured something sleepy, and in that ordinary moment, family on a porch swing at dusk, I understood the deepest truth of all. Love doesn't always get the aisle. Sometimes it gets the porch afterward. The quiet nights after the big day. The ordinary Tuesdays when nothing special happens except presents. And sometimes, if you're lucky, that's enough. More than enough. It's everything. The years ahead would bring more Harper's first day of school, more grandchildren perhaps, more laughter and tears and ordinary miracles. Sophie would keep choosing us. Not perfectly, not always easily, but more often than not. And we would keep choosing her without resentment, without keeping score, just with the steady, unshakable love that had carried us through the hardest days. Because family isn't always the one who walks you down the aisle. Sometimes it's the one who waits at the end of every aisle, arms open, ready to catch you when the ceremony ends and real life begins. And we were there, always. Harper turned 6 that summer, a small but fierce girl with Sophie's curls and Ethan's quiet determination, already asking questions that made adults pause. Why do stars disappear in the morning? Why do people sometimes choose wrong things even when they know better? Sophie brought her over more often now, weekend afternoons, stretching into early evenings, Harper running barefoot through the grass while Sophie sat on the porch steps with Mark and me, talking about ordinary things, school projects, Ethan's new job, the way Harper had started drawing pictures of our house even though she'd only been there a handful of times. The distance that once felt like a chasm had narrowed to something manageable, a small stream rather than a river, crossable with careful steps. Sophie never apologized again in words. She didn't need to. She showed it instead, arriving early to help set up for Harper's birthday parties at our place, texting Mark dad jokes she knew would make him laugh, asking my opinion on nursery colors when they decided to try for another baby. Small gestures, steady and sincere, that rebuilt what had been broken without ever demanding it be declared fixed. Mark met her efforts halfway. He taught Harper how to plant seeds in the garden, tiny fingers pressing dirt around marigold starts, telling her stories about when Sophie was little and did the same thing. He built her a dollhouse in the garage over several weekends, sanding edges smooth, painting tiny windows with careful brushstrokes. When Sophie saw it finished, she cried, quiet, grateful tears, and hugged him so tightly he had to set his tools down. "Thank you," she whispered, "for still being here." He kissed the top of her head. Always. I watched from the doorway, heart full in a way it hadn't been since before the wedding. Not because everything was perfect, scars don't vanish, but because love had found its way back through the cracks. Lily noticed too. She brought Grace over more often now, the cousins chasing each other through the house while the adults sat on the porch watching. One evening, while the kids played tag in the yard, Lily leaned against me on the swing. "You forgave her," she said quietly. Not just said the words, really forgave. I looked at Sophie across the lawn, laughing as Harper tried to tackle Mark in a hug. "I didn't forgive the choice," I said. "I forgave the fear that made it, and I chose to keep loving her anyway." Lily rested her head on my shoulder. "That's harder than staying angry." "It is," I agreed, "but anger keeps you small. Love, even when it hurts, makes room for more." The second baby, a boy they named Miles, arrived the following spring. Sophie called us from the hospital, voice tired and joyful. "He's here, and we want you to meet him." We went immediately. Mark held Miles first, tiny dark-haired, eyes still adjusting to light. Sophie watched him with something like wonder. "He looks like you did when you were little," she told Mark softly. Mark's eyes filled. "He's beautiful." When it was my turn, Sophie placed Miles in my arms and said quietly, "I want him to know both his grandmas and both his grandpas." The words landed gentle but firm, the acknowledgement we'd waited years for. I looked at her over the baby's head. "Thank you," she nodded. "I should have said it sooner." The months that followed felt like breathing again after holding our breath too long. Sophie started coming for Sunday dinners, Harper and Miles running through the house, Grace and Liam joining in the chaos. Mark taught Harper to ride a bike in the driveway while Sophie watched from the porch, Miles asleep in her arms. I helped Sophie plan Miles' first birthday, same backyard, same roses blooming along the fence. When she asked Mark to light the candles again, he did, hands steady, eyes shining. Harper blew them out this time, then looked straight at Mark. "Pop, Pop, you're my favorite grandpa." Sophie didn't correct her. She just smiled, soft, grateful, and reached for my hand across the table. The hurt didn't disappear completely. Some days I still remembered the wedding photos in the drawer, the veil I'd never gotten to adjust one last time, the moment Sophie walked past Mark to take her biological father's arm. Some nights Mark still stared at old pictures a little too long. But the pain had lost its sharpness. It no longer cut. It simply reminded us how precious what remained truly was. We celebrated anniversaries quietly. Our wedding, Sophie's wedding, Harper's birthday, Miles's arrival. With small dinners, shared laughter, gratitude spoken aloud. Sophie never asked us to forget what happened. We never asked her to erase her biological father from her life. We simply made room for both truths, the choice she'd made, and the love that had endured anyway. Lily got married at the small ceremony, close friends. Grace's flower girl scattering petals with serious concentration. Sophie stood beside me during the vows, holding Miles on her hip, Harper clutching her hand. When Lily walked down the aisle on Mark's arm, Sophie squeezed my fingers. "She chose both of you," she whispered. "And she's right to." I looked at her, my stepdaughter, my daughter, and saw the woman she'd become. Flawed, growing, brave enough to choose love again and again. "We all are," I said. After the ceremony, during photos, Sophie asked the photographer to take one of just the four of us. Mark, Sophie, me, and the kids in the background. No one else. Just us. The family that had weathered the storm. When the photo arrived weeks later, I framed it quietly and hung it in the hallway, right beside the wedding photos I'd finally taken out of the drawer. In this new one, we were smiling. Real smiles, tired around the edges but genuine. Sophie's arm was around my waist. Mark's hand rested on her shoulder. Harper and Miles grinned in front, gap-toothed and joyful. No one stood on the edges. No one waited in the background. We were together, center frame, fully present. The aisle choice still lived in memory, but it no longer defined the picture. What defined it now was this love that had bent, broken, and mended stronger. Love that had learned to stand beside instead of behind. Love that had chosen forgiveness, not because it was easy, but because it was the only way forward. And in that choice, day after day, year after year, we found something deeper than perfection. Grace, real, messy, earned grace. The kind that doesn't erase scars, but makes them part of the beauty. The kind that says, "I see you, all of you, and I'm still here, always." The third year after Harper's birth arrived with the kind of gentle certainty that comes when time has finally done its quiet work, healing not by erasing scars, but by weaving new threads around them until the old wounds become part of a larger, stronger pattern. Harper was 7 now, all legs and curiosity, already taller than most of her classmates and full of questions about everything from why leaves change color to why some families look different from others. Miles, 2.5, toddled after her like a determined shadow, calling "Pop, Pop" every time Mark walked through the door. Sophie and Ethan had bought a house closer to us, only 20 minutes away, making weekend visits routine rather than occasion. Sunday dinners became sacred, Sophie arriving early to help in the kitchen, Harper and Miles running through the house with Liam and Grace, Mark grilling in the backyard while Ethan helped set the table. Conversation flowed easily now. School stories, work updates, neighborhood gossip, plans for summer vacations. No one tiptoed anymore. No one waited for permission to speak about the past. It simply existed alongside the present, acknowledged but no longer dominant. Sophie still carried the weight of her wedding choice. I saw it in the way her eyes sometimes lingered on Mark when he played with the grandchildren, in the extra hugs she gave him before leaving, in the quiet way she'd say dad now and then, like she was testing the word, making sure it still fit. Mark accepted those moments without fanfare. He didn't demand more. He simply loved, steady, present, without scorekeeping. One afternoon, while Harper and Miles napped upstairs, Sophie found me in the garden cutting roses for a vase. She stood beside me, hands in her pockets, watching me work. I used to think forgiveness meant forgetting, she said quietly. I know better now. I clipped another stem, careful of thorns. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's choosing not to let the past keep stealing the present. She nodded slowly. I stole something from you both, not just the aisle, time, trust. The way you should have been able to look at those wedding photos without hurting. I set the clippers down. We still have those photos. They're in the drawer. We don't look at them often, but they're there. Part of the story. She looked toward the house where Mark was inside reading to the kids. He still loves me. After everything. He never stopped, I said. That's who he is. Sophie's eyes filled. I don't deserve it. Love isn't about deserving, I told her. It's about choosing. And we choose you. Every day. She stepped closer, hugged me suddenly. The way she used to when she was small and scared. I held her back, felt her shoulders shake once, then steady. When she pulled away, she wiped her eyes, laughed shakily. I'm a mess. Your family, I said. Messes are allowed. That evening after dinner, while the kids played outside and Ethan helped Mark clear the table, Sophie asked if we'd keep the kids overnight sometime. Just the four of you, she said, like old times. Mark looked at her for a long moment. We'd love that. She smiled. Real, unguarded. Good, because I need to tell you something. We waited. She took a breath. Ethan and I are thinking about moving closer, like next neighborhood over. Harper wants to go to the same school as Liam and Grace, and I want to be closer to you, both of you. Mark's eyes softened. You sure? I am, she said. I spent too long running from what I already had. I'm done running. I reached across the table, took her hand. Then come home. The move happened the following spring. Boxes, laughter, neighbors helping carry furniture. Sophie cried when she unpacked the dollhouse Mark had built for Harper years ago. Still perfect. Still waiting. She placed it in the new living room where sunlight poured through tall windows. When the last box was emptied, she turned to us. Thank you for waiting. Mark hugged her first. We weren't waiting, he said. We were living. And now you're living closer. Sophie laughed through tears. Same thing. The years continued to turn. Harper's first school play where she played a tree and forgot her lines but beamed anyway. Miles's first words pop pop. Shouted across the yard. Family vacations where all the grandchildren piled into one beach house and chaos reigned supreme. Sophie never erased her biological father from her life. He still sent birthday cards. Still called on holidays. But she no longer let that relationship define her others. She chose us. Not instead of him, but alongside him. She chose the family that had stayed. And we chose her back every day without reservation. On Harper's 10th birthday, another backyard party, more balloons, more laughter. Sophie asked Mark to light the candles again. He did, hands steady as ever. When Harper blew them out, Sophie leaned over and whispered in her ear. Harper giggled, then looked straight at Mark and me. Grandma Sarah and Pop Pop, you're my favorite people in the whole world. Sophie's eyes met mine across the table, shining, grateful, finally at peace. I smiled back, real, unguarded, the smile I thought I'd lost somewhere between the wedding aisle and the years that followed. Later, when the party ended and the kids were asleep inside, Sophie found me on the porch swing. She sat beside me, handed me a small box. Inside, a single photograph taken at Harper's first birthday, the four of us. Mark, Sophie, me, and baby Harper, smiling in the backyard. No one on the edges. No one waiting. Just family. I keep this on my nightstand, she said, so I never forget who's always been there. I touched the frame gently. We never forgot either. She rested her head on my shoulder. I love you. I love you too. We sat in silence as the stars came out, two women who'd survived a fracture, who'd learned that love doesn't always get the aisle, but sometimes gets the porch afterward. The quiet nights. The ordinary Tuesdays. The small, steady moments that matter more than any grand gesture. And in that silence, with the house full of sleeping children and Mark inside humming softly while he washed dishes, I understood the deepest truth of all. Family isn't defined by who walks you down the aisle. It's defined by who stays when the music stops, who loves you through the choices that hurt, who chooses you again and again, not because they have to, but because they want to. We had chosen each other, flawed, scarred, beautiful. And that choice had built something unbreakable, not perfect, not painless, just real, just ours. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.